The day I lowered her into the ground, my family looked me in the eye with pity and then, before the dirt even settled, moved to strip me of everything we built together. By nightfall, her photograph had been pulled from the mantel, replaced with smiling faces that weren't mine. Papers were shoved in front of me to sign. Whispers circled that I was losing my mind, and soon after, word spread that I was already dead. Yet while they planned their victory, they never considered what I had left behind, a single letter that would undo them all. If you want to see how far betrayal can go and how truth can rise from ashes, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what you think the letter revealed. My name is Harold Ellis. I'm 72 years old. My spine creaks when I move, my fingers twitch sometimes when the air is too cold, and I talk more to the birds these days than to people. But I've still got all my thoughts in order. I remember numbers, birthdays, the color of Martha's favorite sweater, and the exact pitch of her laugh when she watched those corny baking shows. She passed away last week after a long battle with breast cancer. We were married 46 years. I built the house we lived in, planted every shrub, painted every wall, and patched the roof more times than I can count. I thought losing Martha would be the final heartbreak. Turns out, it was only the beginning. That afternoon, I came back from the crematory with a box in my arms that felt heavier than it looked. I placed her ashes carefully on the mantel, the same place where her reading chair used to be before Rachel rearranged everything for better energy. I turned to find Brian and Rachel sitting at the dining table with some man I didn't recognize. Brian stood when he saw me. "Dad, this is Derek," he said, gesturing toward the man in the suit. "He's helping us handle some things. Come sit." Derek extended a hand I didn't take. "Mr. Ellis, I'm here as a legal advisor. Your family wants to ensure that everything transitions smoothly now that your wife has passed. There's some paperwork to review. It's nothing to be alarmed about." That was the first lie. I sat down, mostly out of habit. Rachel offered me tea like this was a casual family chat, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Brian slid a packet across the table toward me. I opened it, skimming pages filled with phrases like power of attorney, medical oversight, limited financial control, and the worst of all, incompetent to manage independent living. I looked up slowly, locking eyes with my son. "What is this?" I asked. "You think I've lost it? You think I need a guardian?" Brian gave me that soft, patronizing look people use on old men in waiting rooms. "Dad, we're just trying to be proactive. You've been through a lot lately. It's a big house, lots of responsibility. We're just thinking ahead. This is just to make sure everything stays manageable for you and for all of us." "For all of us," I repeated. "You mean for you?" Rachel put a hand on his arm like she was warning him not to push me too hard. But the damage was already done. I saw through the script they were reading from. Martha had barely been gone a week, and here they were, trying to erase me from the picture, paperwork in hand, ready to hand me off to whatever facility would take an old man with a house and a pension. "You were always forgetful, Dad," Brian continued, too quickly. "Even before Mom got sick. You left the stove on that one time, remember? And you missed your cardiology appointment." "I missed it because I was at the pharmacy getting your mother's morphine," I snapped. Silence. Derek the lawyer cleared his throat, pretending to adjust something in his folder. Rachel suddenly found her tea fascinating. Brian shifted uncomfortably, but not because he felt guilty, because I was making things difficult. "We've already made a few calls," he admitted. "There's a place up north. It's quiet, scenic. They got a great memory care unit and a library. You'd like it." "You've made calls," I repeated, "without talking to me, without even asking me what I want." Brian sighed, like I was being unreasonable. "We were going to tell you after the service, but you were so emotional." Maybe they realized they'd gone too far. But when I parked and walked up the porch, I saw two unfamiliar cars in the driveway, and heard voices from inside. Young voices, loud, carefree. The front door was slightly ajar. I stepped in slowly, calling out, "Brian? Rachel?" But no one answered me. That's when I saw it. The hallway was cluttered with boxes labeled storage, donate, and sell. A young woman, no older than 22, with bright red hair and earbuds dangling from her ears, was photographing my wedding china on the dining table. Next to her, a second girl was stacking my books. Books Martha and I had collected over decades, into bins. I blinked, frozen in the doorway. The girl with the camera finally noticed me and pulled out one of her earbuds. "Whoa, are you Harold?" she asked, like I was a stranger in my own house. "Brian said you might stop by. He said to tell you it's all under control. We're just helping out, organizing the place for listing." "For listing?" I didn't answer her. I turned and walked into the living room. Martha's rocking chair was gone. So was the record player. The photographs along the wall were replaced with bland, generic art that looked like it came from a catalog. I went upstairs to the bedroom and stopped cold. My dresser was open, half my clothes already packed. Martha's nightstand had been emptied, and a strange pair of boots sat by the closet. Brian's, I assumed. My stomach turned. I walked back downstairs and found Rachel in the kitchen, sipping coffee with a clipboard in her hand. She didn't look surprised to see me, only mildly inconvenienced. "Oh, Harold," she said smoothly. "You're up early. We're just decluttering a bit. You know, to prep the house for the market." I stared at her. "The market? What the hell are you talking about?" She smiled like I was a toddler throwing a tantrum. "It's just too much house for one person. You don't need all this space. We figured you'd be more comfortable somewhere quieter. Simpler." "You mean somewhere out of sight?" I said flatly. "Brian didn't even call me. You've already hired people to go through my things." She sighed, like she was the one being wronged. "Harold, we're doing what's best. You can't take care of this place. And emotionally, it's got too many memories. It's not healthy for you to stay here." My voice dropped to a near whisper. "That was my wife's bedroom. That was our kitchen, our books, our memories. You're not helping. You're erasing us." She put down her cup and picked up the clipboard. "Look, I understand this is hard, but we've already scheduled a photographer for next week. If you want to pick a few items to take with you, we can box them up. Brian's talking with a facility near Rockford. It's had excellent reviews." I didn't hear the rest. I walked back out to the porch. One of the young women was filming a TikTok, dancing in front of the flower bed Martha had planted 10 years ago. I heard her say, "Cleaning out Grandpa's hoarder house. Look at this vintage tea set." My son didn't return my messages. Rachel had taken control like a corporate manager phasing out an old department. The house was no longer mine, not just legally, but in spirit. It had been gutted, sanitized, turned into something unrecognizable and temporary. I spent the next few days sitting in silence, staring at the motel TV without watching, letting the screen's light flicker across the walls like shadows of life I couldn't get back. Then the whispers started. Not literal ones, but the kind of side-eyed, lip-twisting rumors that ripple through towns like mine. I stopped by the local hardware store to pick up a wrench and a new watch battery. The cashier, a kid no older than 20, rang me up but wouldn't meet my eyes. Behind me, I heard two women chatting in hushed tones near the gardening aisle. One said, "Did you hear what happened to old Mr. Ellis?" And the other replied, "Something about early onset dementia, right? Poor thing." I clenched my jaw and walked out without taking the change. That evening, while grabbing a coffee from the gas station, the attendant, a guy who used to wave at me every morning for years, just nodded and looked away. I knew how small towns worked. Once the family decided you were broken, the whole community fell in line like sheep. But nothing prepared me for what came next. 3 days later, Rachel organized a celebration of life event for Martha at the community center downtown. I hadn't been invited. I only found out because an old friend from the VFW called me and said, "Hey, Harold, I saw your name on the flyer. Big tribute for Martha this weekend. You speaking?" I told him I hadn't heard anything about it, and he went quiet. "Well, I'm sure it's just an oversight," he said, but we both knew it wasn't. I decided to go anyway. I wore my best blazer, the one Martha always said made me look like I belonged in a courtroom, not a workshop. When I walked into the hall, I was hit with the scent of catered chicken and artificial flowers. A slideshow of photographs played on a projection screen. I expected to see wedding photos, pictures of Martha baking, laughing, holding our son as a baby. Instead, the screen was filled with images of Brian and Rachel, vacation shots, business dinners. Martha only appearing in the background like a prop. Not one photo of the house she loved. Not one photo of the garden she planted. And none with me. I stood near the back of the room, invisible. No one greeted me. Most attendees didn't even seem to recognize me. I caught glimpses of neighbors I'd known for 30 years smiling and clapping as Rachel took the microphone and gave a speech that made my blood run cold. "Martha was a pillar of strength," she said. "When Brian and I first moved into the family home to help her through her illness, she welcomed us with grace. We did everything we could to honor her memory, and now we carry forward her legacy by turning that home into something new, a place filled with joy, light, and new beginnings." A ripple of applause followed, and I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. I wanted to scream. That wasn't the truth. They hadn't moved in to help. They'd moved in to take over. They hadn't honored her memory. They'd replaced it. I turned to leave, but as I reached the doors, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Hey, Grandpa." I turned and saw Lucas, my grandson, standing near the punch bowl, dressed in a wrinkled blazer, looking uncomfortable. He hadn't been part of the setup. He was barely mentioned. I walked to him, and he handed me a paper cup. "You weren't supposed to be here, were you?" he asked, not unkindly. I shook my head. "Neither were you," I replied. We both stood in silence. The humiliation from the memorial festered inside me like an untreated wound. I could have endured the quiet theft of my house, the erasure of my wife's memory, even the whispers branding me senile, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. A week after the event, I received a letter at the motel. It was in an envelope with no return address, typed neatly, coldly. Inside was a formal notice, signed by an attorney representing Brian and Rachel, alleging that I had committed inappropriate conduct toward a hired housekeeper and that, as a result, they were initiating a formal complaint to both the state elder services and local authorities. The letter was filled with vague accusations, unverified statements, and a chilling request to submit to a psychological evaluation or face legal proceedings regarding potential harassment. My hands trembled as I read it again and again. There had never been any housekeeper during the time I lived at the house. They had brought in some temporary workers during the so-called decluttering, but I hadn't even spoken to them beyond a few brief words. I knew this wasn't a mistake. It was strategy. They were painting me into a corner, giving me two options: either accept their narrative and surrender control, or fight back and risk being portrayed as not just unstable, but dangerous. I went to the attorney's office listed in the letter and demanded to speak. The receptionist, a thin woman with eyes too tired for her age, gave me the kind of look you give someone already presumed guilty. "He's in court today," she said without checking. "You'll have to make an appointment." I left without a word, rage bubbling inside me like boiling tar. The following day, I went to the local library to print out copies of every legal document I'd kept, from Martha's will to the property deed to my own medical records, which showed no signs of dementia or instability. As I gathered the pages, I heard a group of teenagers giggling behind me. One of them said, "That's the guy from TikTok, the creepy old man." My cousin said he tried to hug their cleaning lady or something. Gross. I stood up, spine straight, but they didn't even flinch. They didn't see Harold Ellis. They saw the caricature Rachel and Brian had created, the version of me that made it easier for them to discard me. A few days later, I was served. Official papers. A court hearing was scheduled in 2 weeks regarding my mental competency and guardianship. The notice claimed concerning behaviors, aggressive language, and emotional instability. The grounds? Testimonies from Rachel, Brian, and 2 anonymous sources, undoubtedly the girls they had hired to pack the house. The hearing would determine if I needed to be placed under supervised care. They weren't just kicking me out of the house. They were trying to lock me away legally, permanently. I met with a legal aid attorney, a young man who looked barely older than Lucas. He read through the documents, raised an eyebrow, and said, "This is one hell of a setup." I nodded. "It's theater," I said. "They're turning me into a liability." He agreed to represent me, pro bono. I provided him with every document I could, every scrap of evidence, including receipts, dated notes from Martha, letters from doctors, even photographs showing I was the one caring for her during her final months, not Brian or Rachel. He asked me if I had any witnesses. I hesitated, then gave him Lucas's name. "He's my grandson," I said. "He's the only one left who sees the truth." After Lucas found me in the back of my truck and handed me the notarized power of attorney I'd signed months earlier, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. It was a flicker, not yet a flame, but it was there. Lucas promised we'd challenge the guardianship, and he meant it. Over the next several days, he stayed by my side, arranging meetings with my attorney, collecting evidence, reaching out to people who had known Martha and me long before Rachel and Brian rewrote our story. And while we prepared to defend the truth, Brian and Rachel doubled down on their lies. They had no idea Lucas was involved. To them, he was still just a teenager too busy with video games and high school to care. They underestimated him, and that was their mistake. What enraged me most during that time wasn't just their false accusations or the legal traps they'd set. It was their performative compassion, the way they paraded their version of me and Martha across social media, painting themselves as noble caregivers sacrificing everything to support an aging, confused father. I saw the post because Lucas showed them to me, screenshot after screenshot. Rachel uploaded a video titled "A Day in the Life of Caregiving," where she narrated over clips of my house, now rearranged and scrubbed to look like a hospice suite, talking about the emotional toll of watching a parent decline. She spoke with tears in her voice, describing how difficult it was to balance their careers, parenthood, and caring for me as my mind supposedly slipped away. She showed the mailbox with my name on it, the chair I used to sit in, my workshop, now empty and locked. She even held up one of my jackets and said, "He doesn't even remember it's his anymore." That jacket was the same one I'd worn the night Lucas found me. The video spread like wildfire, shared by family friends, reposted by parenting influencers, and praised in comment sections as heartbreaking, beautiful, the kind of love every parent deserves. The deception was so thick, so well produced, that even people who had known me for years bought into it. One old colleague from the plant sent me a message through Lucas saying, "I'm so sorry, Harold. We didn't know how bad things had gotten. Your family's doing a great job taking care of you." It wasn't just words. Rachel and Brian used the attention to launch a fundraising campaign under the guise of needing money for in-home medical equipment, transportation services, and memory care support. The campaign photo was a black and white snapshot of me and Martha from 30 years ago, digitally aged to make us look more feeble, more helpless. They raised over $20,000 in 2 weeks. Meanwhile, I was still sleeping in Lucas's friend's spare room, trying to regain access to my own bank account. Every day, I watched my life being rewritten in real time, while strangers celebrated the very people stealing it from me. The hypocrisy reached a new level when Rachel was invited to speak at a local nonprofit event about family care and elder advocacy. She stood on stage in front of dozens of people, some of whom had shaken my hand at Martha's funeral, and spoke about her father-in-law's silent decline and how important it was to honor our elders, even when they don't recognize us anymore. She ended with a standing ovation and a quote she attributed to me: "Love is remembering for someone when they forget themselves." I never said that. I never forgot myself. They just wanted me forgotten. Lucas and I spent our days gathering evidence. And every night he sat across from me at the kitchen table with his laptop open, combing through documents, emails, timestamps, and screenshots. He was tireless. At one point, I asked him why he cared so much, why he was risking his relationship with his parents, why he was spending his nights helping me instead of living his life. He looked up from his screen and said, "Because when mom and dad started telling me you were broken, something didn't feel right. And when I saw them sell your tools and toss your books, I knew it. They weren't protecting you. They were erasing you. And I'm not going to let that happen." One afternoon, Lucas hacked into an old cloud storage account that used to sync with the home security cameras I'd installed years ago. Most of the footage was gone, but one folder hadn't been wiped. It contained video clips of the days leading up to Martha's passing, me giving her medication, helping her into bed, brushing her hair. Silent, intimate moments that proved I wasn't the forgetful, negligent man Rachel had described. The footage had timestamps, my voice clear, my actions deliberate. We sent them to my attorney, who called them invaluable. He said the videos not only countered their claims of negligence, but proved that I was her primary caregiver, not them. The louder Brian and Rachel shouted their false narrative to the world, the quieter I became. But in that silence, I listened, and in that listening, I understood just how far they were willing to go. Their hypocrisy was no longer a disguise. It was their reality. They believed it. They breathed it. But nothing prepared me for how ruthlessly they would take their erasure campaign to its final stage. If the first wave was about legal power and the second about public image, this was about history, erasing not just who I was, but that I had ever existed in their story at all. It began with the obituary. I stumbled upon it by accident one morning while reading the local paper online. There it was: "In loving memory of Martha Ellis, beloved wife, mother, and community advocate." It read like a carefully curated lie. It listed Brian and Rachel as the primary caregivers during her final journey, and claimed that Martha had spent her last months surrounded by the loving warmth of her children. There was no mention of me, not once. 46 years of marriage, and I was scrubbed out like a smudge on glass. I sat back, stunned. My chest tightened with something deeper than anger. It was grief all over again, this time for a life being rewritten before my eyes. Lucas came into the room, took one look at me, and said, "You saw it, didn't you?" I nodded slowly, passed him the screen, and he read it, fists clenched. "They're rewriting everything," he muttered. "They're making it look like you were never part of her life." I didn't answer because I couldn't trust my voice. 2 days later, Lucas received a message from one of his cousins, a teenager who still believed Rachel's version of the story. "I heard Grandpa passed away," it read. "Sorry. Mom said it was peaceful." Lucas looked at me, horror in his eyes. "They told people you're dead." I didn't even react at first. The lie was so bold, so absurd, I couldn't process it. But then we checked Rachel's Facebook page. In a new post, she had uploaded a photo of a candlelit dinner table with 2 glasses of wine and the caption, "We honored Dad's memory tonight. He finally found peace. We'll carry on his legacy with love." The comments were filled with condolences. "He was such a strong man. Your care for him was inspiring. He's watching over you now. It hit me like a truck. These people weren't just lying anymore. They were burying me while I was still breathing. They were grieving me in public while I sat alive in a borrowed room, stripped of identity, stripped of dignity, watching them perform my funeral for likes and sympathy. Lucas was furious. He called his cousin back and recorded the conversation. The cousin confirmed that Rachel had told the extended family I had passed peacefully a week ago and that a small private cremation had already taken place. That lie was spreading like wildfire. It was no longer about removing me from the house. They were removing me from memory. And it worked. I tried calling an old friend, James, someone who served with me during my time in the Air Force. He didn't answer. I left a message, told him I was still here, still fighting. He never called back. A week later, I found out he had sent flowers to Rachel's house. A white wreath with a ribbon that said, "For Harold." Lucas and I spent the next few days gathering digital evidence. We archived every post, every comment, every message that showed they were declaring me dead. We screen-recorded videos, saved voice messages, and even documented the dates. Our lawyer said we were building something powerful, something undeniable. But the worst moment came when I discovered the letter. I had written a long, heartfelt letter to Brian and Rachel after Martha passed. It wasn't kind, but it was honest. I had poured my grief into those pages, told them how much it hurt to lose her, and how betrayed I felt by their behavior. I had left it on the hallway table the day I was forced out of my own home, hoping they might read it when they were calm, hoping it might remind them of who I was. Now, Lucas showed me a video he'd found on Rachel's Instagram stories, saved before it disappeared. It showed her in the backyard, standing beside a fire pit, holding a few pieces of paper. She looked directly into the camera and said, "Sometimes the only way to deal with toxicity is to burn it." Then she tossed the pages into the fire. Lucas paused the video, zoomed in, and there it was, my signature at the bottom of the page. She burned my letter. She burned my truth. And she made a public performance out of it. I felt cold, not angry, numb. That letter was the last thing I had tried to say to them, the last olive branch I'd extended in a world that had turned its back on me. And she reduced it to ash, grinning. It became clear that Rachel and Brian weren't just toxic, they were predators. They weren't content with control. They needed to erase the evidence that I had ever mattered, that I had ever loved, that I had ever resisted. But what they didn't know was that Lucas had kept every backup, every recording, every message. And he wasn't just saving them. He was organizing them into a timeline, labeling them, building a portfolio that our lawyer said would be damning in court. And even more importantly, Lucas was preparing something else, something they wouldn't see coming. They thought I was gone, thought they could bury me with lies and social media sympathy. But what they didn't count on was that the same grandson they ignored, underestimated, and treated like a bystander would become the key to unraveling their illusion. While I stayed hidden in plain sight, existing only in the shadows of their performative grief, Lucas was working behind the scenes to make sure every single truth I still held would not only survive but be seen. The fake memorials, the blog posts about my final days, the obituary that read like fiction, they'd all be exposed, and the final blow, the one Rachel would never anticipate, was already in motion. Months before Martha passed, she had asked me to write a letter to Lucas. She'd always known he was different from the others, quieter, more observant, more like her. She'd said, "If anything ever happens to me, I want him to have something from us, something real." I'd written it by hand, for pages folded neatly into an envelope, and tucked it into a book she loved, an old poetry collection with her name scrawled on the inside cover. After I was kicked out of the house and learned they had sold or boxed up nearly everything we owned, I feared it was lost. But Lucas found it. Weeks earlier, He had gone through a storage unit Rachel rented, under the guise of looking for some old photos for a school project. Inside a box labeled Junk Donate, he found the book. Inside the book, he found the letter. He didn't tell me right away. Instead, he had it scanned, notarized, and preserved. The letter wasn't angry. It wasn't legal. It was love on paper. It talked about who Martha and I were before the illness, before the vultures circled. It told stories about our youth, about the first time we danced in the living room, barefoot, laughing. It explained what we valued, how we wanted to be remembered, and most importantly, it included something no one else knew, a handwritten statement signed by both of us, stating that in the event of our passing, the house, the assets, and all personal belongings would be entrusted to Lucas, not out of obligation, but because we believed he would honor them. It wasn't a will. It wasn't legally binding, but was personal, emotional, and when read aloud, it carried a weight heavier than any court order. Lucas knew this, and he had a plan. The day of the guardianship hearing arrived. I wore a simple gray suit, one that still fit well despite the months of stress and weight loss. Lucas walked beside me, carrying a slim black folder. Brian and Rachel were already there, seated with smug smiles, flanked by their legal team. Rachel wore black, as if she were mourning me all over again. Brian avoided eye contact. The room was quiet except for the murmurs of attorneys and the occasional shuffle of paper. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with eyes that missed nothing, asked everyone to be seated. My attorney opened with facts. He presented the timeline, the evidence, the medical records, the videos showing me lucid, caregiving, present. He showed screenshots of Rachel's blog posts, her social media lies, the fundraiser full of fabricated stories. Then he introduced the letter. Not the one I had written to Brian, the one Rachel burned, but the one to Lucas. He explained its origin, its preservation, and its emotional weight. The judge asked to read it herself. She read it slowly, carefully, flipping each page like it held more than ink. Then, with a sharp breath, she handed it back and said, "This letter alone isn't a legal document, but it certainly paints a clearer picture of the motivations at play." That's when Lucas stood. He hadn't been required to speak, but he asked permission. The judge granted it. He walked to the front of the courtroom and faced Rachel and Brian directly. "You told everyone my grandfather was dead," he said calmly. "You used his name to raise money, to build your brand. You erased him from his wife's obituary, burned his letters, and locked him out of his home. But you didn't break him. You just made him quiet. And while you were out there chasing attention, he was still here, alive, grieving, and watching everything." Rachel scoffed, but the room had gone still. Lucas opened the black folder and displayed a timeline of everything. When the blog posts went up, when the social media stories were posted, when the fundraiser began, and when they declared me dead online. Then he played a short video, one I hadn't seen before. It was Rachel, accidentally filmed by her own security camera, laughing with a friend on the front porch, saying he's probably still alive somewhere, but this way we don't have to explain why he's not in the family pictures. The courtroom reacted audibly. The judge banged her gavel. Rachel's lawyer whispered furiously in her ear, but the damage was done. The mask had slipped. The courtroom victory was only the beginning. While I had finally reclaimed my name and my legal rights, the world outside still wore the version of me that Rachel and Brian had painted. Their online content continued to circulate, full of false grief and teary confessions. The donation money still sat in their account, unreturned. And the community that once shook my hand at barbecues and church picnics still whispered when I walked by, unsure what to believe. I didn't want vengeance, but I needed the truth to breathe, to grow loud enough that even those who blindly adored their lies couldn't ignore it. Lucas knew this too. The courtroom had given us a legal win, but what we needed next was a public reckoning. And Lucas had a plan for that as well. He had compiled every shred of evidence into a clear, digestible format, a digital dossier, complete with video clips, scanned letters, audio recordings, screenshots of lies, and timelines that unraveled Rachel and Brian's performance. Then he uploaded it all into a single website, ellistruth.org. A simple black and white homepage with one line at the top. This is what really happened to Harold Ellis. He posted on a quiet Thursday morning. Within hours, it began to spread. He sent it to our lawyer, local news stations, old family friends, even church groups and the same elder advocacy nonprofits that had praised Rachel's fake stories. Within 24 hours, the narrative began to shift. At first, there was confusion. People who had praised Rachel's blog posts now commented asking why she had claimed I was dead. Others asked for explanations about the money. The blog was flooded with defensive comments, and Rachel quickly turned off the ability to reply. But it was too late. Screenshots of her silence were just as powerful. Lucas's site included the full court ruling, the judge's exact words, and the now infamous video of Rachel joking that I was probably still alive somewhere. The story caught fire. Local journalists picked it up, then state outlets. Then a national podcast called Family Truths contacted Lucas asking for an interview. He agreed on one condition, that I be allowed to speak for myself. 2 days later, I sat in front of a microphone in a quiet studio, my hands steady, my voice calm. The host asked me to tell my story from the beginning. I spoke about Martha, about how we built our home, about how we raised Brian and loved him even when he didn't deserve it. I spoke about what it felt like to be erased, to watch your life become someone else's performance, to be declared dead while still waking up every morning. I spoke not as a victim, but as a man who had survived being unseen. The podcast went live that same week and quickly became one of the most listened to episodes they'd ever aired. Comments poured in, letters, messages from strangers. Some said they cried. Some said they saw parts of their own family in my story. Others said, "I'm so sorry we believed them." But the most important message came from my old friend James, the one who had sent the wreath. He called me and said, "Harold, I don't know how to apologize enough. I should have known better." I told him the truth. You believed what they wanted you to believe. But now you know, Rachel and Brian couldn't hide anymore. Their fundraiser was flagged and frozen pending investigation. Donors demanded refunds. Sponsors of their podcast dropped out. The Elder Advocacy Group removed her from the speaker list and issued a formal statement. We regret platforming a story that was later revealed to be misleading and harmful. The fall was quick and brutal. The community that once praised them now saw the rot beneath the surface. But what surprised me most was how they responded. Not with apologies, not with shame, but with denial. Brian posted a video from his car, face red and voice shaking, claiming the cancel culture mob had taken things out of context. He said I had twisted everything, that I was being manipulated by Lucas for personal gain. It was almost laughable, until you remembered that just weeks earlier, they had told the world I was already buried. Their defiance didn't save them. The district attorney began reviewing the fundraiser for fraud. Civil suits were being considered. And while they faced mounting pressure, Lucas and I rebuilt. I wasn't looking for revenge. I didn't want to take their house or their money. I just wanted my name back. And now I had it. The donations that had poured into ellistruth.org were redirected, and my request to elder abuse prevention programs. We worked with local nonprofits to share my story, not as a cautionary tale, but as a call to listen, to really listen, to the elderly before assuming the worst. I even returned to the community center where Rachel held her fake memorial and gave a talk titled, "I'm Not Dead Yet." People laughed, they cried, and most importantly, they listened. The ones who had doubted me before came up after, some with tears in their eyes. They didn't just see me as the old man anymore. They saw me as a man who had fought to be heard, and who finally was. Lucas became something of a quiet hero. His school awarded him a citizenship medal. Journalists praised his integrity. But more than that, he became my friend, not just my grandson. We sat on the porch of his parents' former home, now mine again, thanks to the court's reversal, and watched the sun set over the garden Martha once loved. We planted new flowers, not to replace hers, but to honor them. And every letter, every photo, every page they tried to erase, we displayed them proudly. Not out of spite, out of remembrance. The silence that followed their downfall wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm, thick and waiting, filled with unspoken consequences. Rachel and Brian had left town in disgrace, their social profiles deactivated, their podcast deleted, their public image in ruins. But escaping a town didn't mean escaping justice. Their fake stories had gone too far, and too many people had been deceived for the fallout to simply vanish. The lies they told weren't just offensive, they were criminal. The fundraiser had brought in tens of thousands of dollars under false pretenses, with Rachel repeatedly stating in videos and blog posts that I was mentally unfit, that I was receiving care, that my condition required expensive medical equipment that was never purchased. Their caregiving journey was fiction sold for sympathy and profit. The fraud investigation moved fast once the truth came to light. Donors were angry. Local law enforcement had no choice but to respond, especially with the media spotlight intensifying. A formal complaint was filed with the state attorney general's office. Witnesses were interviewed, including the teenage girls who had helped clear out the house. One of them confessed that Rachel instructed them to toss anything with Dad's handwriting and had promised them bonuses if they cooperated without asking questions. Another admitted she overheard Rachel say, "He'll be out of the picture soon enough, just smile and pack." Within weeks, subpoenas were issued. Financial records showed the fundraiser money had been used not on medical needs, but on a luxury vacation, home renovations, and equipment for their podcast studio. When investigators dug deeper, they found altered timestamps on some of the caregiving videos, indicating they were filmed after I had already been locked out of the house. Rachel had even faked footage of a so-called episode where I allegedly forgot my name. Turns out it was staged with a stand-in actor in poor lighting. Lucas had preserved the original files and metadata. The discrepancies weren't just suspicious, they were damning. A grand jury convened to review the evidence. The official charges came 2 months after the website went live: wire fraud, elder abuse, and defamation. The news spread quickly. Reporters gathered outside their temporary apartment in another state, cameras flashing as Rachel tried to hide behind a hoodie, shouting, "It's all taken out of context." Brian didn't speak. He just kept his head down, holding a duffel bag like a man preparing for exile. Their mugshots were published on every local outlet. The same people who once shared their caregiving blog now shared court reports. Meanwhile, back home, I was called to give a statement. The district attorney asked if I wanted to pursue full civil charges for damages. I thought about it. I remembered sleeping in the back of my truck, the funeral I wasn't invited to, the letter burned like garbage, and the shame that clung to me like a second skin. I looked at Lucas, who stood quietly at my side during the meeting, and I made my decision. "Yes," I said, "I want every penny they stole and my name returned. Not for me, for the people they lied to, for the truth." A civil suit was filed alongside the criminal case. Lucas served as a key witness. His timeline, his recordings, his determination to tell the truth were now central evidence in both proceedings. The trial was scheduled for early spring. Courtrooms were packed. Journalists took seats beside former donors. I testified on the second day, this time not as a defendant, but as a survivor. I spoke clearly, with no bitterness in my tone, only truth. They didn't just try to steal my house, I said. They tried to erase me. They wanted to make me a story that served their ambitions. But I never stopped being real. I never stopped being here. Rachel's attorney tried to paint it as a misunderstanding, a family conflict gone too far, a case of blurry lines between care and control. But the evidence made that laughable. Emails, audio clips, financial spreadsheets, metadata. Lucas had prepared for every counterargument. Brian didn't even take the stand. His lawyer said he was emotionally unfit to testify, but everyone knew the truth. He had nothing to say. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Rachel and Brian were sentenced to 2 years of probation, 6 months of house arrest, mandatory restitution of all funds raised, and community service at elder care centers. They were also ordered to issue a public apology, which aired on the same platforms where they once told their lies. But the apology wasn't what mattered most to me. It was the fact that they were no longer invisible, no longer able to hide behind staged empathy. They had been seen, judged, and held accountable. Their names, once associated with compassion, were now linked to betrayal. Lucas and I watched the verdict from the front row. When it was over, he squeezed my hand. "They can't touch you anymore," he said. I nodded. "And they can't rewrite me again." The court awarded a portion of the restitution funds to a foundation we helped create, the Ellis Trust for Elder Advocacy and Legal Protection Against Abuse. We launched it quietly, no press conferences, just a small note on the website. For every voice that's been silenced, we hear you. Donations poured in, not out of pity, but out of solidarity. Life didn't return to what it was. It couldn't, but it became something honest. I was no longer a shadow, no longer the whispered rumor in town. I walked into the diner, and the waitress greeted me by name. I sat on park benches and nodded at familiar faces who now met my eyes. People who once ignored me now asked how I was doing, not out of guilt, but out of recognition. They saw me, not the victim, the man who survived. Rachel and Brian faded into memory like a bad dream. Their social accounts never came back. Their faces rarely appeared in town. Occasionally, someone asked if I'd ever forgive them. I always gave the same answer. Forgiveness is about letting go of hate. But trust? That has to be earned, and they never even tried. After the trials, the courtroom headlines, and the flood of media coverage faded into the past, the world became quiet again. But this time, the silence was not suffocating. It was peaceful, grounded in truth, no longer weighed down by shame or doubt. My name was no longer a twisted footnote in someone else's story. It belonged to me again. The house Brian and Rachel had tried to gut of history was restored, not just with paint and repairs, but with meaning. Lucas and I spent weeks bringing back pieces of the life they had tried to erase. The first thing we did was reinstall the photos they had taken down, wedding pictures of Martha and me, snapshots of holidays long gone, little memories that once lined the staircase wall. We placed Martha's ashes in a glass case by the fireplace, the same fireplace where we used to read poems to each other on cold winter nights. Beside it, Lucas hung a framed copy of the letter she and I had written to him. "So no one can ever pretend it didn't exist," he said. And he was right. The letter had become more than a message. It was a shield, a map, and a lighthouse during the darkest storm of my life. Life didn't return to how it was when Martha was here. Nothing could. Grief doesn't vanish when justice is served. It just changes shape. Some days, I missed her so much I could hardly breathe. Other days, I felt her beside me in the quiet moments, in the rustle of leaves outside the kitchen window, in the smell of her old sweater hanging in the hallway. But I wasn't alone anymore. Lucas had become more than my grandson. He was my partner, my anchor, my bridge back to the world. We started hosting Sunday dinners. At first, it was just us and a couple of his friends from school who didn't have family nearby. Then, slowly, more people came, neighbors, old coworkers, even some distant relatives who had once believed Rachel's lies, but came forward with apologies and open hands. I didn't turn them away. People make mistakes, but the ones who stayed, the ones who showed up not just once, but again and again, became part of a new kind of family. Not bound by blood, but by choice, by respect, by truth. Lucas took the Ellis Trust and turned it into something real. With the help of a few lawyers who had heard our story and wanted to contribute, he created a hotline for elderly people being financially or emotionally manipulated by family. He organized workshops at senior centers, teaching people how to protect their assets, document their wishes, and recognize red flags. One day, he asked if I'd be willing to speak at one of them. I hesitated. I wasn't a public speaker. But then I remembered the silence they had tried to bury me in. I stood in front of a room full of people, some younger, some older, and told them everything. I told them how easy it is to be overlooked when you're no longer convenient, how love can be weaponized when tied to money, and how the quietest person in a room, like a grandson with a notebook and a question, can sometimes be the one who saves you. That day, after the talk, an elderly woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She said her son had recently taken over her finances and was pressuring her to sell her home and move into a care facility she didn't want. I thought I was being ungrateful, she whispered. But now I know I'm not crazy. I'm just being erased. We connected her to legal help that same week. That was when I truly understood what our fight had meant, not just for me, but for others walking the same path, quietly, invisibly. Lucas called it the ripple effect. You throw one stone of truth into the pond, he said, and the waves reach farther than you ever imagined. In the spring, we planted a garden in Martha's honor. Tomatoes, basil, her favorite peonies. We placed a bench under the oak tree she used to sit beneath on Sunday afternoons. The bench had a plaque on it, to Martha Ellis, who listened, who loved, who remembered. That's what she always did. She remembered who people were, even when they forgot themselves. She would have been proud of Lucas. She would have been proud of what we built from the ruins. And I like to think, in some way, she still knows. One afternoon, as we sat on that bench, Lucas asked me something I hadn't expected. "Grandpa," he said, "what do you want to be remembered for?" I looked out at the garden, at the house behind us, at the life that had been broken and then carefully, defiantly rebuilt. I thought about all the things I had lost and all the things I had reclaimed. And then I said, I want to be remembered as a man who didn't let anyone else write his ending, who spoke up, even when no one believed him, and who didn't disappear just because someone else said he should. Lucas smiled and nodded. Then that's exactly who you'll be. Rachel and Brian never came back. Word was they moved out west, tried to start over under different names. Their names didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that they didn't win. Not really. They thought power came from control, from money, from shaping stories. But power, I learned, comes from truth. It comes from the people who see you when no one else does. It comes from standing up when everything tells you to sit down and stay quiet. My life now wasn't perfect. I still had bad days. I still felt the echoes of what they did. But I was no longer a ghost in my own story. I was alive, I was seen, and I was heard. When people asked me how I survived it all, I always told them the same thing. They tried to write me off, but I held the pen. The end. Before I close this chapter of my story, I want to thank you for staying with me through every twist, every betrayal, and every moment where it seemed like I'd been erased. If you made it all the way to the end, it means something in my journey resonated with you. I'd like to ask you to do me a small favor. If you found this story powerful, meaningful, or even just unforgettable, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so more people can hear stories like mine. I'd also love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what part of this story struck you the most? Was it the way my own family tried to write me out of existence? Or the moment my grandson Lucas stood up and gave me back my voice? Do you think the punishment Brian and Rachel received was fair? Or do you believe they deserve more? And one more thing, where are you watching from right now? Whether it's your living room, your car on a lunch break, or late at night before bed, I'd be grateful to know where this story reached you. Your comments mean more than you know. They aren't just feedback, they're proof that stories like mine matter, that voices like mine aren't lost in the noise. So don't be shy. Like, subscribe, share your thoughts, and let me know where you're listening from. I'll be reading every single one. Would you like me to write a few different variations of this outro? Like one that's warmer, one that's sharper and dramatic, and one that's conversational, so you can test which tone works best for your video?